In this video, we're going to be looking at my top 5 fun and powerful bleed builds for Shadow of the Erdtree. They are incredibly fun to use and you're going to have a great time, so let's go ahead and jump right into the first one. Also, just a disclaimer here at the beginning, everything you are seeing has been recorded on New Game Plus 2 and 3, and I am going to be level 150 for all of these builds. So first off, we are going to be looking at a Claws of Night build. This is an absolutely phenomenal claw weapon that has come to us from the DLC, and it's going to have a really good dex scaling at B. You are going to have innate blood loss on this weapon, meaning we are going to play around that blood loss to get our attack power to proc extra high. But as you can see in this video, it is absolutely phenomenal. It's a fun time to use. You do have a lack of mobility, considering you can't use Shadow Step or Bloodhound Step. However, the Scattershot Throw Ash of War is really where this weapon shines, allowing you to have a ranged option instead of a little bit extra mobility, which I think is a fine trade-off. Now, obviously, this weapon is a claw weapon, which means your successive attacks are going to be crazy fast, and considering the physical damage is pretty much par for the course when it comes to claw weapons, your successive attack damage that you're going to get from all of your talismans and flasks is going to make your physical damage spike incredibly high, especially when that hemorrhage proc kicks in. You are going to be absolutely shredding through everyone. Now for this build, you're going to be using the Claws of Night. For your armor, you're going to be using the White Mask for that hemorrhage proc, as well as the Rakshasa armor set for extra damage. For your talismans, you're going to use the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Millicent's Prosthesis, the Rottenwing Sword Insignia, as well as the Shard of Alexander. Now for your flask, you're going to be using the Thorny Cracked Tear and the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear to get as much damage as possible. And for your buffs, you're going to use Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. Now this is going to be your stat spread. Don't pay attention to the stats on the previous screen, but this is exactly what you're going to want to use. There's no arcane on these weapons, so we aren't going to be putting anything into arcane, but you want to dump as much into dexterity as possible while maintaining that 60 vigor so you don't get two-shot. Next up, we're going to be looking at our Great Katana build. This is the first of 2 Great Katanas that are going to be on this list, but this weapon has excellent scaling with dex, and obviously it's going to come with that fantastic Great Katana moveset. We have played around with this build and found that a lifesteal build works amazing with this weapon, so we're going to be using the Blood Tax Ash of War, which also is going to help negate the blood-sucking crack tier effects of losing health over time in order to get more damage. We're also going to be building around successive attacks with this build. Obviously, Blood Tax helps out incredibly well with that, and our talismans and tier are going to allow our attack power to spike crazy high, while at the same time getting hemorrhage to proc quickly, and it is absolutely amazing. We're also using Melania's Great Rune for this because that did recently get buffed to allow you to get more lifesteal on your successive attacks, and we don't have it equipped, but if you wanted to get the Crimson Sapping Cracked tier, that would add even more lifesteal to your build, pretty much making you unstoppable and unkillable with the Blood Tax Ash of War. I think overall the build performs incredibly well. It is a lot of fun to use, and it really gives you an incredible amount of survivability and damage within Elden Ring. So for this build, you're basically going to use Vigor, Dexterity, and Arcane. You want at least 40 in Arcane, as well as 50 in Dexterity, and then anything from 55 to 60 Vigor so you don't get one shot. Next up, we have our Dane's Footwork build with a Bleed affinity, as well as the Whirlwind Kick Ash of War. You basically become a spinning tornado of hemorrhage and absolutely destroy everyone. This is a really solid build, especially if you're looking to build up hemorrhage fast, because the successive attacks you get from Dane's Footwork happen so quickly that you can proc hemorrhage multiple times per boss fight without any problem at all. Your charged R2s are also going to pack a crazy punch, which is really nice, and you are going to get some decent stance damage from using this particular weapon. I think personally I enjoy Dane's Footwork over the Dryleaf Arts, but both are incredibly fun, and when putting hemorrhage on both of those, you are going to get very similar results. Now against bosses, this build absolutely shreds, but if you use it against normal to medium-sized enemies, there is literally no problem. You will kill everyone pretty much in one spin of your Ash of War. As you've seen so far, the bosses go down incredibly quickly. Now in terms of how this build works, just like any other bleed build, you want to hit as many attacks as humanly possible as quickly as you can. So we are going to be building off successive attacks using different talismans as well as tiers to spike our successive attack damage, as well as spike our overall attack power, causing hemorrhage as fast as possible, then further spiking our attack power even more. I wanted to put a little bit more in Arcane, and we've evened out in Strength and Dexterity with, of course, that 60 Vigor that we're going to need in order to survive 5 in the DLC. So for this build, you want to use the Dane's Blood Footwork, you also want the White Mask for the extra attack power boost, you also want the Rakshasa armor set for the extra damage. For your talismans, you want the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, the Milson's Prosthesis, the Shattered Stone Talisman, as well as the Shard of Alexander. For your flask, you want the Thorny Cracked Tear, as well as the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear, and per usual, we are using that Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow combo. Next up, we have our second Great Katana build on the list, and that is going to be Rakshasas' Great Katana. This is an absolutely amazing weapon, and the Weed Cutter Ash of War just got buffed in the most previous patch, allowing it to swing just a little bit faster than it typically would. You are going to get insane hyper armor with this build, the damage output is incredible, and the dexterity scaling is great. You're going to have a B scaling in dexterity. We're also going to have innate blood loss on the weapon, obviously, because it's a katana slash great katana, and overall this is just a very fun build to use that makes you feel like an absolute powerhouse. The Weed Cutter Ash of War is also going to take very minimal FP, however it will chip away at your stamina rather quickly. That being said, typically with any enemy or boss in the game, you can just Weed Cutter them into submission by continually spamming that Ash of War, stun locking them, or forcing them to block until eventually their stance is broken and you can land a critical attack. As stated before, I've really grown to enjoy the Great Katana and its moveset, and considering this weapon has both slash and pierce damage, and most bosses are weak to pierce damage, you are going to have a really easy time not only using this weapon, but using this build going through the lands between. So for this build, you're going to use the Rakshasas' Great Katana, you'll have the White Mask as well as the Rakshasa armor set for all that extra damage. For your talismans, you want the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, the Milson's Prosthesis, the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, as well as the Shard of Alexander. For our flask, once again, we're using the Thorny Cracked Tear as well as the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear, and we're using Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow for that extra damage boost. We're also going to be using an identical stat spread to the build we used for the Claws of Night, so I'll let you look at this real quick, and then we'll get into our next build. And for our very last build on the list, I couldn't do a bleed build list without mentioning the Blood Beast Claw. These are definitely, in my personal opinion, my favorite weapon from the DLC. The Savage Claw Ash of War is absolutely bananas, especially if you take this into PvP. You just become such a feral machine that you're pouring out a ton of damage and proccing blood loss incredibly fast. And considering this weapon scales with strength really well, you're going to also be doing some really good hard-hitting physical damage, with the blood loss buildup at 108, which is incredible. This weapon is going to proc all of your successive attack talismans quickly, and it doesn't matter what size enemy or boss you are fighting, you are just going to absolutely obliterate their health pool. And if you don't want to just spam the Ash of War, the light attacks as well as the heavy charged R2 are incredibly good as well. One thing I have noticed that could be a small potential problem with this weapon is the fact that once you get into the Savage Claw Ash of War, it is very difficult to roll out of it at all. However, if you time those windows correctly and manage to land that entire Ash of War, it is going to serve you incredibly well, and it will make most bosses and enemies very easy within this game. Now, when it comes to the build, you're using the Blood Beast Claws as well as the entire Rakshasa armor set. I was using just an aesthetic hood, being the Pelt of Ravla, but you can use the White Mask here if you want to go for that blood loss. For your talismans, you're going to use the Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation. I was using the Crusade insignia and the Rottenwing Sword insignia. The flask will be the same as it has been, the Thorny Cracked Tear as well as the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tear, and obviously we have our Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. The stat spread you see on the right is what I was using at the time, but what I would do is lower the strength down to 60 and spike the arcane up to 40 and keep everything else the same so you can benefit as much from that descaling in arcane as possible. And guys, that is going to be it for our top 5 most fun and really powerful bleed builds within Shadow of the Erdtree. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments bleed builds that you guys have been using, because I'm always down to try out some new builds, and bleed is just incredibly overpowered no matter which way you look at it. So if you like the content, make sure to subscribe on your way out, hit that bell notification. We got Black Myth Wukong coming up incredibly fast, so without further ado, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.